We engage in debates and discussions that unearth the stories behind the news. And we have our light moments too by chit-chatting about issues that affect our day-to-day life. Stay right here on the Sundown. Join in and be part of the show on iRadio, your eye on South Sudan. The Sundown. For the news, views, opinion, debates, and discussions. Listen to who is who talking about issues that affect our country and continent. Only on the Sundown, your eye on South Sudan.
Hello and welcome to the Sundown Show on iRadio with me, Madrama James. Today we begin the program with a look at some of the key developments shaping the country's financial sector. Well, yesterday, economic cluster chaired by Vice President Dr. Benjamin Bolmel has deliberated on a proposed national budget of 5.2 trillion South Sudanese pound for the 2025-2026 fiscal year. According to the Office of the Vice President, the budget was presented by the Minister of Finance and Planning, Dr. Marial Dongring-Ater. It aims to accelerate economic recovery, maintain economic stability, and support the country's ongoing democratic transition. Among the key priorities outlined is strengthening the agriculture and mining sector, ensuring timely payment of civil servants' salary, and increasing humanitarian support for vulnerable communities across the country. The cluster also reviewed President Salva Kiir's National Master Plan to empower youth, which includes the development of a new intellectual property policy to protect young innovators and promote the creative industry. Vice President Dr. Bolmel emphasized the need for fiscal discipline, transparency, and a people-centered approach in public spending, urging all institutions to ensure that every pound is spent brings meaningful change. To break this down or further, I'm joined live in the studio by Boboya James to discuss the budget proposed and what it could mean for South Sudan economic and future. Good to have you and welcome to the studio of iRadio.
Thank you so much for having me this evening.
All right. First thing first, Boboya, let's begin with the bigger picture. What stand out to you as most proposed, that's a 5.2 trillion pounds budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a mixed response that I can make to the people of South Sudan when it comes to the national budget. Because the national budget is actually the blood of the country. It's the requirement that makes people either happy or not happy. If things are not going in a good way, or if things are going in a good way, then people are very happy. But let me just give you the bigger picture in terms of where South Sudan is going, whether it's going in the right direction or not. I just want to give you some kind of perspective from the region. Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, and DRC Congo are now in a very deeper move in terms of their budget processes. For example, if you look at Uganda, they're presenting their budget of 73.2 trillion Uganda shillings, which is $20 billion budget. If you look at Kenya, they just presented a budget of about 4.239 billion Kenyan shillings. That translates to close about 18 to 20 billion US dollars, right? If you look at Rwanda, for example, a very tiny country in East Africa, they have $4.8 billion budget. If you look at Tanzania for 2025-2026, their budget is 20.19 trillion Tanzania shillings, which translates to be the highest, about 21 billion US dollars, right? So everything's about 20 something billion dollars. If you look, for example, the Burundi, very tiny country, they have 5.2 trillion Burundian shillings, which are about 1.77 billion US dollars, right? It's very tiny also country. I mean, if you compare to Rwanda and Tanzania, or if you compare to Rwanda and Burundi, for example, or DRC, that's the largest in terms of geography. Look at Democratic Republic of Congo, their budget is $18 billion, right? So closer to $20 billion in terms of the national budget. South Sudan national budget that has just been came out yesterday was 5.2 trillion. I used the exchange rate of 445 and 6 SSP, South Sudanese pounds. So that means our budget, it passed that way, it's going to be $1.15 billion. The smallest in the region. In the region, yeah. And I tried to do some kind of also comparison between what happens in 2024-2025 budget. The budget was 4.2 trillion, which is actually more lower, but by then the exchange rate was also more lower. So the budget for 2024-2025 was $1.3 billion. So basically the government has lost close to $200 to $300 million of the budget. And that's not how the budget's supposed to be. The budget's supposed to go up. And that makes me to worry in terms of the national public finance management and the national budget process in South Sudan. It appears to be not something that helps this country. And there are a lot of factors, of course, we'll talk later on in terms of what's going on in this country, because the public finance management processes, when it comes to national budget processes, it's supposed to go up, because we now have a new, territory, we have other requirements coming up in terms of governance, in terms of other sectors that needs to be improved, and that's not adding up. Right. And the reason I'll talk about the reason later on is because they talk about the two sources of revenue, which is basically the oil, which is not doing great right now. We talk about the other resources, including gold mining. And I want to tell you, I just did the analysis of the Museveni's budget. I mean, the Museveni's speech to the nation, or the State of Nation address. And he made a reference in terms of $107 million revenue coming from gold mining, right? And I just did a report 1 week or 2 weeks ago in terms of gold mining in the Eastern Equatorial region, where we're losing between 50 to $100 million of that resource, right? That $100-something million would have been an addition to the national budget. And do you know what happened? Most of the gold is going into Uganda, and Uganda is the one certifying the gold, and becomes like a certificate of origin is Uganda. And that's why Uganda now putting that gold as part of their own goal, which now goes in the national budget. Well, so those are just few things that I want to talk about. The quiz of the iceberg. That's really very small in terms of our discussion this evening.
Well, Boboya, the government says this budget aims to accelerate that economic recovery and ensuring that microeconomic stability in practical terms, in real term. You said the current proposed budget is one of the lowest in the region. I'm talking about the East African region. What does that mean to an average person who is listening to us now?
Yeah, we've been advocating for pro-citizen budget, which budget is supposed to be helping the people of South Sudan to thrive through the economic processes, a budget that is supposed to be more economic inclusive budget, a budget that is supposed to help to steer the economy, and therefore the private sector then will grow, and the economy will then grow, and then lots of people get employment. You begin to see emergence in terms of employment opportunities, private sector growth. You begin to see agriculture boosting and things like that. And we also told Parliament and the Minister of Finance in terms of what we want to see in the budget, because this budget is not a bottom-up process of the budget process, right? It just, the ministry is deciding to say, okay, you have this amount of money allocated. In East African countries, like I told you, in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Burundi, DRC, and Rwanda, they do the national plans, right? From the local government level to the districts to the national, and they have a national development plan. And then this national development plan that defines the priorities of the year, and then those priorities of the year will begin costed to become the budget. And of course, there are a lot of elements I want to talk about in terms of sectors. For example, the accountability sector, they need to look at that. They have to look at the health sector. They have to look at public administration in total. They have to look at economic institutions that are important in South Sudan. Infrastructure is something that is more key in driving development, and also the human development, and also the private sector growth in South Sudan. The rule of law, security, social services, and humanitarian affairs is key in South Sudan. If you look at what's happening right now with the, going away of the USAID funding or the American funding in general, and now South Sudan left on its own, right? And what does that actually happen? Because we expect even the budget to go up, because now that the humanitarian support has completely dwindled, and therefore government is taking the responsibility to begin to talk about some of those issues. Issues to do with education, natural resources, and rural development processes, the peace building process in South Sudan. So the budget doesn't catch up some of those elements, more importantly, because those are important elements that can sort of boost the economic infrastructure when it comes to budget processes, but that's not adding up. And I think one of the issues that I want to talk about is that also there's been a lots of corruption going on in South Sudan, and therefore, when we did the analysis of the Central Equatorial budget before 2-3 years ago, they are worried that the moment they started telling that the budget is this billions of dollars, that means they're telling the South Sudan that, oh, there's too much money in the government. So the best option is just to restrict yourself to have a very small budget, because people are lazy. They don't want to sort of reach
the clear picture of what's happening.
Exactly. And that's the reason why when we asked them about the oil for roads, for example, we told them, you cannot manage the oil for roads from the president's office and give this money to ARSC and maybe some few Chinese company. That money needs to be appropriated using the budget. And Parliament needs to have an oversight role. And that's the reason why Parliament decided to bring some kind of elements of the road, oil for roads into the national budget. But of course, by the time they're doing that, the oil for road is no longer the business as usual, because there's no actual oil going into China to begin to finance roads construction in South Sudan. So there are lots of good intentions, but of course some of those intentions are rudimentary and driven by self-interest, and huge corruption followed it. And that's the reason why it becomes very, very, very bad when it comes to bad governance of this particular budget process in South Sudan. So I think this is a serious matter that we wanted to address with the government and civil society. We wanted to have a very honest dialogue in terms of what we want to see, because there are a lot of elements in terms of analysis. For example, look at our microeconomic stability. It's terrible. It's reducing. I mean, if you look at even our GDP, it's becoming problems. And one thing, when I was interviewed in terms of the oil, I told them this oil is just going to be like press releases, right? But it's not adding up, because the government right now doesn't have enough money. If you go to Nimule, for example, look at how much these guys are collecting. It's decreasing. The South Sudan National Revenue Authority is not collecting the money the way it's supposed to be, because a lot of international companies and businesses are reducing their footprint in South Sudan, and therefore there's no addition, to the economy. Let me just give you one example. For example, because of the conflict that is about to emerge in South Sudan, and the Americans, for example, pull out of the construction of the embassy. That embassy the budget for that embassy is about $700 million. Imagine if they were to continue doing the construction. That means every month they're adding either $50 to $60 million into the economy, because they're employing people, they are driving around, they're eating, they're drinking. So all these costs end up in the economy. But that has gone. 700 million has been stopped. So that's one of the major expenditure activity when it comes to infrastructures in South Sudan.
Well, now, Boboya, America, they have so far withdrawn their funding to South Sudan, and there is humanitarian crisis going on. There is health issues, cholera outbreak since last year up to now. Much as the government said, over 90% of people are recovering from the disease, but there is a need for them also to come and intervene in this situation. Now, with this 5.2 trillion SSP, what would be your projection?
Nothing will happen. Let me just give you an example. If you want to do construction of roads, you want to say we're going to put 200 kilometers of road in the financial year 2025-2026, right? This 200 kilometers of road, let me just say maybe a road costs $1.3 or $1.2 million, right? You're not talking about $300 million to go onto roads, right? Basically now the budget is $800 million left. You talk about unification of the army. they need about $100 million to do the unification of the army. And of course now $400 million left. So about $600 million left. So you now talk about, you need to pay these big public servants, you talk about in the particular year, maybe $150 to $200 million. So basically, you talk about $500 million left. So with this $500 million, the office of the president always spend 1,000% of expenditure. So basically, the $500 million is going to the office of the president. That's it. So there's no development, no progress, no nothing. So that's why we talk about output-based budgets. We told Parliament many years ago when we did a lot of trainings for parliamentarians, we need to say, let's cost the budget. We need to recruit 1,000 doctors. How much does it cost to recruit 1,000 doctors? We need to build 3 hospitals this year. We need to build, supply primary healthcare and primary healthcare units, or the primary healthcare units and primary healthcare services. We need to have maybe 10,000 of that, or 30,000 of that, or 40,000 of that. So you cost that. So by the end of the year, you know that, okay, you have built 200 kilometers of road, you have marammed 1,000 kilometers of road, you have recruited teachers, you have paid teachers. So that is the output-based budgets, like numbers, you know. And if you do that, it will give you the true picture about what is required. Because all the East African budget, they have output budget. For example, if you look at Uganda, they now told you how many kilometers. They're going to build about 1,000 kilometers of roads in the next 2 to 3 years, right? They know every year they're going to build 500 kilometers of road of tarmac road. And they know how much that costs. And then from there, you begin to know, okay, we have our internal budget, which is basically our internal resource mobilization, which is from oil, non-oil revenue, and maybe internal borrowing. It's going to be a 1 billion of that. And we are lacking maybe probably 2 billion or 1 billion of that. And then we need this money from the international community, right? So then we begin to think about how do we do the external borrowing. And remember, our debt is even more higher than our budget. Our debt is close to $2 billion US dollars in this particular year. So we're not doing really good in terms of the budget processes and the debt management. And everything that the government has been saying is basically is an attempt to do something, but it's not anchored in a very strengthened policy. It's not anchored in the fiscal discipline. It's not anchored in terms of what our national even development plan is talking about. Because we have the strategy 2020-40, it has articulated several issues. If you look at our national development strategy, talk about the constitutional rule of law, security and peace, which talks about, of course, development, the permanent constitution, the strengthening security sector reforms, the building more judicial process and access to justice. They talk about economic and social development. It really talk about issue with governance in terms of strengthening local governance systems, supporting in anti-corruption institutions. Talk about develop informed and the ICT sector that needs to be strengthened. Even the issue about environment and climate change, infrastructure, and also the economic stability. Those are some of the aspirations of the national development strategy, which is not even mirroring the current budget they're talking about. I mean, they talk about gold because they've seen something coming up from the gold to finance the budget, and they talk about agriculture. For how many years have they been talking about agriculture as the engine of growth in South Sudan, and very less support to agriculture? It's not like plan for modernization of agriculture in terms of working with cooperative groups within the green belt of South Sudan, where they will get access to finances, but they just do announcements in terms of what is required. For example, this issue of the tractors. You cannot talk about tractors if there's no security in those regions for people to even go and till their ground, right? There's no access to markets. They have not even improved the market conditions. The taxation. I mean, if you look, for example, how you bring goods from from Terkeka or from Nimule to here, there are a lot of roadblocks. So they have to do away with some of those roadblocks so that farmers will then feel motivated to spend too much energy in farming and bring food to the market. But above all, they have to work on those roads. If it's not going to be tarmacking, they have to mud on those roads.
Well,
yeah.
Now, Boboya, what would you tell someone who would say, okay, it's good for you to pass a budget that you can implement and you are sure that you will get, at the end of the day, these resources, instead of passing a bigger budget and of which you cannot even afford. And at the same time, someone will say, this is so like scaring. Why are you scaring people?
You know, our Public Finance and Management Act, our Public Finance and Accountability Act, it lays out a very, very clever requirements for how we manage our money in this country when it comes to the public funds. One is that once the national budget has been passed, there is an appropriation bill that is going to be made, and also there is the utilization bill that's usually passed to make sure that the money is being spent in a good way. So usually it's asked for the Minister of Finance to disburse the money quarterly to institutions that are going to be the spending agencies, right? The problem is the Minister of Finance is not willing to send the money to the accounts of these institutions. So that's the reason why people go to the Minister of Finance and line up. I've seen a few weeks ago they have made an order saying nobody should come and follow money. The money is going to be transferred to accounts of those institutions, and then the expended institution will then begin to spend that money and then account back. And of course, when we worked with Parliament 2 years ago, we told Parliament that do not allow approval of further funds until you get accountability of the quarterly expenditures to Parliament, and the Parliament then need to work on providing oversights to that. The problem is they are not interested, and one of the biggest issues is that it's not the priority of the president or the priority of the government to make sure that this happens. Because if you look at the sacking of ministers, for example, people now spend too much money to show to the president that they can do the job, other than really fulfilling the function of the Ministry of Finance, the function of the Bank of South Sudan, because these two institutions are interested institutions in terms of the fiscal policy and the monetary policy of this country, right? So if they're not allowed to exercise their fiscal policy requirements and the monetary policy requirements, it's not going to be business as usual. So I think there's no stability in those two institutions, the Bank of South Sudan and the Ministry of Finance, in terms of doing their work, and also allowing the revenue authority to collect money. Because, for example, if you look at even the states, instead of getting money from the ministries, they're getting money from the revenue authority direct. It's not in the law that says that the revenue authority is collecting and also giving out. No, they collect and they remit to the Minister of Finance, and the government is supposed to get it from the Minister of Finance, but not from the revenue authorities themselves. So I think that's one of the also loopholes of the law that is made deliberately, because people think the more loose it is, the more people eat, and therefore there will never be development in this country. And that's the reason why you see there's no development in South Sudan going on, because of some of those bad behavior and practices.
In 2024-2025 fiscal year, there were some irregularities in paying civil servants' salary. Now, one of the priorities in these 5.2 trillion we are talking about right here, the focus is on agriculture and payment of that civil servant salary. How realistic is this going to work this time around?
I mean, that has been there for the 3-4 years ago, in terms of every year they say, okay, our priority is agriculture, our priority is paying the civil servants. Until today, maybe 6, 7, 8 months of civil servants not been paid. And there's no money that is coming out. I mean, if you look at what happens right now, you've seen there's something going on with ARC in terms of $600 million of 117 or so companies that have not been paid for the last 4 or 5 years, and they're thinking about taking the government or taking ARC to court or something like that, and they're still following that money with the Minister of Finance. So the intention was that there's supposed to be money coming from the oil, and this oil money will then help to pay civil servants. But even we advocated for the payment of civil servants, including our advocacy on the increase to more than 400%, because we want to make sure that there's enhanced salaries for civil servants. But also, I am not an advocate of really payment of civil servants if they're not doing their work. Because why would you pay people who are not doing their work? For moving forward, I think the payment must be linked to deliverables. You do your job, and then you're paid. But of course, these people have also been suffering in this country for many years. They've been providing services to South Sudan. They've never been paid. So if the part of the budget is to pay that, then it should be okay to do that. But of course, if you look at now, there is regression in terms of the budgets. Instead of going up, I would have even advocated for 10 trillion budget, so we have about maybe $6 billion budget. So you can have maybe 2 billion of that for road construction, because we really need to get roads in this country. We need to get electricity in this country, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
There was an announcement from the chairperson of the economic cluster about timely payment of civil servants' salary. And starting from January this year up to May, we have been getting some of this notification that most of their money are, being factored in. Now, how can this trust be really restored to make sure that at the end of the day, if 24th of every month, that is implemented?
It's the requirement and obligation of governments. I am a CEO of my organization. I don't announce salaries to staff, because it's their right and obligation to make sure that every month they get paid, right? It's there. So why would the government come out every month to announce press releases about salary payment, right? It's their job. Everybody knows that if I am working in government or working in a private company or I work for an NGO, I get paid. So The intention was good in terms of paying, but I just don't really like the way they're announcing. I mean, why should they announce somebody to get 35,000 SSP, right? Why would they announce that this person is getting his paid, right? Because it's money is transferred to institutions and the institutions pay. It's not actually, it's not the Minister of Finance that announces. The Minister of Finance must be announcing a press release saying we have 2 billion, 3 billion of SSP has been transferred to the spending agencies, including salaries, so that people go to the spending agent, because the spending agent that pays is not the Minister of Finance. The Minister of Finance job is just to transfer to the spending agencies. For example, Minister of Environment, you get your money there, and then you pay your employees, you do your activities there. So it's a good gesture from government, but the way it's managed, it becomes like a public show, which is not really. The intention was not really that displeasing.
Others are saying it's for transparency and accountability purpose.
Yeah, but why would it be the salaries alone? Why not saying we have transferred money for construction of 5 hospitals, buying vehicles for this particular ministry, or we have transferred money for building local government offices, why transfer money for peace building activities in this region, or we transfer money for buying weapons. I mean, why would only be the salaries that's a problem, right? So that's my policy difference with the Ministry of Finance. So announce all money that goes to the spending agencies, specify the purpose of which this money has been transferred, but don't only rally on salaries as a basis to sort of please. Because the reason why they're doing that is that the president is interested to see a Minister of Finance that is paying salaries timely. And the reason why Bolmel, His Excellency Bolmel, became the vice president, because they thought he would do wonders. And I think one of his pleasing to the president and also to the infrastructure of the government is to show that he's doing his economic activity, right, or economic function. But it's not done in a good way. Of course, the will is there, but not only salaries.
And again, yes, quickly before we cross off, of course, if you promise that you'll do this at the end of the day, you have done it, why would you keep quiet?
No, it comes automatic. People know. I mean, there are a lot of things that the government is doing a good job, but they're not announcing.
All right.
Right?
Well, dear listener, when we come back about these 5.2 trillion, there was also focus on agriculture and youth empowerment. That will be our focus. And then we shall also give you that time to ask you a good question on 0911-022-986 after this break.
هل أنت جنوبي وعندك مشروع شغال في الزراعة أو أنظمة الأكل؟ برنامج الأغذية العالمي WFP مع وزارة الزراعة وشركائه أفريلابس والسيد جرو كامباني ليميتد بيدعوكم عشان تقدموا في تحدي الابتكار في أنظمة الغذاء إجنايت 2025. ده فرصتك عشان تكسب منحة بيصل ل$40,000 وتلقى تدريب وتوجيه من خبراء، وكمان تتواصل مع مستثمرين والصناع بتاع القرار. لو الشركة بتاعك مسجل رسمي وشغال أكثر من 2 سنين وعندك تأثير حقيقي في تحقيق الأمن الغذائي أو مجابهة تغيير المناخ، التقديم ده ليك. النسوان والأشخاص ذو الإعاقة والمجتمعات المحمشة مرحب بكم جدا للتقديم. قدم حسي عبر الرابط ده www.bit.ly/ignite-challenge. رسل مستنداتك كله عن طريق رابط درايف قابل للمشاركة عشان حماية البيانات. آخر يوم للتقديم يوم 13 شهر 6 2025. للاستفسار اتصل على 0922 107667 أو 0920 788816. الإعلان منشور كمان في مواقع التواصل الاجتماعي WFP, Afrilabs والسيد جرو كامباني ليميتد.
Itabasma le radio الحقيقة I radio in Takum في جنوب السودان.
Dear listener, welcome back. If in case you have just joined us, you're listening to the Sundown show. And yesterday, the economic cluster chaired by Vice President Dr. Benjamin Bolmel has deliberated on a proposed national budget of 5.2 trillion. And now to talk about this, I'm joined live in the studio by Boboya James. And one of the priority focus of this 5.2 trillion SSP focus on agriculture and mining. How realistic is it for this sector to drive economic growth in short, medium and long-term period. Boboya, welcome on board.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So I think what I want to say is that there's really good prospects when it comes to the gold mining. I know there's illegality going on right now, but we've seen yesterday the government started coming out to begin to say we want to stop that process. So investing in the mining industry is very good. There are potential areas, for example, in Eastern Equatoria, in Central Equatoria, and also in Western Barakazal. And if you look at the gold there, if it's more developed, it might get to about $300 to $400 million a year, which is a good income to the government. So if the intention is now to invest in those, is key. But of course, it has to be. We have to develop the capacity first, and then begin to see how that adds up to the national budget, which is good spirit. Number two, it's in terms of agriculture. I've been talking to many people in government in terms of, we don't need to do agriculture like we have all the 73 counties, we have 10 states and the 3 administrative areas, and if you buy tractors, it goes all those. It's not going to work like that. There's specific areas, for example, you look at the green belt, where it's really potential for agriculture. I mean, let me tell you one example. When the USAID was funding UNOPS and farm a project, they went to Yei and they started to work on maraming those roads. If you go from Yei, you go all the way to border to Congo, to Morobo, you go to Yarebe, and also almost close to the border to Uganda. They built those roads, and then farmers started to spend a lot of energy in terms of digging, producing more food, right? I've seen Ugandan farmers, traders going from Juba to Yei, and from Yei going to the village to buy food here local in South Sudan and bring them to Juba, right? That was a very good model, but of course the war then killed that initiative, right? So if we can begin to work on, for example, let us get like maybe $30-40 million and just maram the road to Yei, maram the road to Yambio, maram the road to Eastern Equatoria, and also maram the road all the way to Budi area, so that we begin to get agriculture coming into Juba from those roads. And then we begin to look at farmers associations, give them tractors, give them inputs, and one thing that I wrote a submission to Parliament before was, there are farmers who have money in this country and they want to bring agricultural machineries. Can we just say, you bring your agricultural machineries, we don't tax, so people can bring, right? Because that's what Kenya did. Many years ago, Kenya made 3 commitments. One, they want to end misery, they want to end diseases, and they want to end ignorance, right? And those programs boosted people to become more aggressive to their lives and also the lives of the nation. So here we can work with farmers groups. We give them tractors, we give them inputs, and we give them loan to begin to cultivate.
Right.
We then begin to work on the taxation processes where, if you produce food locally, your taxes becomes more lower than when you bring food abroad. So that people then fear to bring food from outside, and then people will be forced to do some work. But let's just have a pilot within the Equatoria region for agriculture in terms of this regular agriculture, and then we have maybe other agricultural activities in Awil, for example, the rice, and also in the BA area, and also in Upper Nile for other crops, and then you begin to see things happening, right? But it's not announced just like that without a strategy. There must be a strategy that needs to be placed for plan for modernization of agriculture. And then we cost that, we begin to give out money to farmers.
Well, this budget also talked about supporting a youth through that intellectual property policy. How important is it for young people and young innovators in this country?
A good intention. If you look at the Revitalized Peace Agreement, it talks about the Youth Entrepreneurship Fund, right? That has not been operationalized until today. So we need to have youth innovative funds, youth entrepreneurship fund, youth development funds. But above all, we also need to have money earmarked for the vocational training schools so that they can begin to build, life skills for young people to be able to venture in some of those sectors. Because right now, vocational training has not been prioritized. So there and not only the youth. Even this is a very good opportunity for the ex-combatants who may be demobilized from the security arrangement processes, to build skills in them, and then they send out to communities, right? So, but this needs to be discussed, and civil society needs to have a say in it, and this inclusive process in terms of consultation with communities and something like that. It's just not going to be announced like that. Right. So this particular budget, I think this is a good opportunity for government to really get as much views as possible. They have to do this consultation, offer spaces for consultations, so they begin to know exactly what is the priorities looking like and how this priority is going to be implemented when it comes to the budgetary processes. But there must be a will. It shouldn't be a one-party driven process. It's a good spirit. But of course, Parliament also needs to have a lot of conversation in this, because most of the parliamentarians have no idea about even these budgets. Even if they pass the budget, they have no idea about what is in these budgets. So we need to help these parliamentarians to really understand how this needs to be, passed, discussed, and then also, implemented. Because one of the things that I want to tell you, for all the budgets that people have been working on, they're not even spending the money. We don't know how much money has been spent. Some ministries are allocated funds, but they don't get the money by the end of the year.
In fact, yesterday, Vice President Dr. Benjamin Bolmel talked of that physical discipline and transparency. And having this now on board, what are some of the main challenges facing the government in terms of transparency, in terms of achieving this accountability too? Johnny Moses is also saying, what is the outcome of the previous budget? 2 questions, then we give also a chance to our patient audience to ask their good questions.
The outcome of the previous budget was that at least there was a budget, and government never, much as the budget was passed late, but then it was passed. But one of the biggest issues is that the money has not been transferred to the institutions to be able to do their work. And then, of course, because of the conflict issues that are happening, the priorities then get diverted, right? So what we want to say is that there's also too much fear from all institutions to hold the Minister of Finance accountable in terms of their money. Of course, if you look at, Edmond, you can talk about the weak implementation of the governance resolutions, for example, right? So the governors came and they make a resolution of what they want to see in their own states. And this budget is supposed to buy it. This budget needs to go to the states. This budget needs to go to the counties. This budget needs to go to the PIAMs and BOMAs. This budget needs to go to the municipalities, the cities, and the town councils. This budget is not for the national government. It has to go into those units of development, because the local government is the only vehicle of development. So if the transfer is made, and they do the announcements of the transfers, and then everybody then go and do the advocacy of that. But of course, one thing that I also want to talk about, which we told Parliament last time, it's part of our analysis, was that you pass national budgets, but the states do not even have their own budgets. You see, the counties do not have, there are only 2 counties, the whole 73 counties in South Sudan, only 2 counties that have budget. For example, last time we have Bor that passed their county budget, and we have Yei that has passed the county budgets. The rest spend money without budgets. Of course, you cannot also spend money without budget. You need to have a budget, right? Yeah. So I think that's one of the biggest issues that I want to talk about in terms of that. But finally, just in terms of the accountability measures which you're referring to here, is that we've been pushing for the public finance and public procurement disposal of assets act to be operationalized. We're happy that at least now, 1 week ago or so, they had started to talk about, implementing that, because all this money is going to end up into procurement processes, either procurements of works, services, and supplies issues. So we want to tighten the procurement process, the public procurement process, so that every institutions of government needs to have the procurement processes and procurement procedures in place. That's where you can tie the wastage of resources and also tighten corruption in a way in this particular country.
Dear listener, it's high time for you now to pick that cell phone and dial our studio line on 0911-022-986-986. It's time for you to ask your good question to that Boboya right here in the studio. First caller, iRadio. مساء النور.
متصل كشف من POC.
مرحبا كشف.
أنا باعي في استوديو وباعي ضيفنا في استوديو برضه.
نعم.
وتحياتي لكل المستمعين ناس دي برنامج عشان نقول لهم مساء الخير. أنا عندي سؤال في الضيف بتاعنا في الاستوديو. طبعا الميزانية هسه هو قاعد يتكلم فوق الميزانية بتاع سنة 25 26. في ميزانية سبق، يعني في ميزانية بتاع 24 25 وفي ميزانية بتاع 23 24. وهسه في الأرض الواقع الميزانية هسه قاعدة ترفوف قول عاملة في الدولة في ميزانية بتاع 23 24. ميزانية 25 عمل مصارين حتى الآن، يعني حتى آخر يوم طبعا ليش 6 ده آخر عام المالي للجيران ما وصل سوق ما تم الصرف بتاعه، يعني دو متأخرات كاملة، يعني سنة كامل بما فيه في زيادة في شهر أو شهرين في عام 2023 24. أنت ما تجهز ميزانية جديد وهو عامل في دولة ما عندهم قروش ما كانوا يصرفوا، انه متاخرات زي سنه. انت اللي طالما عندك ميزانيه 5.2 بليون انت ما قادر تدفع قروش على الناس ليه؟ ده سؤال نمره واحد. نمره اثنين هو انت بس ماشي تعامل عشان طبعا جنوب السودان ده من المنظومه بتاع شرق افريقيا يقعد لان دول بتاع شرق افريقيا هم ماشي جزء الميزانيات بتاعهم 25 26 هم ما يدفعوا قروش بتاعهم لعمال بتاعهم. انت ما عايز تبقى موضه عشان انت مجبور تعمل ميزانيه ولا انت قدام ميزانيه بالفعل اللي ينزل في ارض الواقع الناس يصرفوه. ده سؤال نمره اثنين. سؤال نمره ثلاثه حتى انتم وزاره الماليه كان غزين اصابات في بنوك تجاريه هي وحده او هي مصلحه حكوميه يشيل القروش بتاعه. لازم يمشي للشركات يلقى قروش ما في قروش في البنك. ليه ما تشيل نظام زي النظام السودان القديم؟ زمان السودان القديم بيشيل قروش كطائره من خرطوم للولايات. اذا كان البنوك التجاريه ما عندهم كاش البنك المركزي يشيل طائره بتاع يدوان طائره بتاع منو ضغط فيه قروش يرفعوا لولايات يعني يوم 23 يوم 24 يكون مصرف لان في اتفاقيه من قبل بول ما قال يوم 24 هي قروش بتاع الناس كله يوصلوا لقوه عامله في الدوله. ده بقى معروف الناس كله يعرفوه قاعد كويس. لكن ليه تبغى توزعوا قروش في البنوك التجاريه؟ لان البنوك التجاريه ما عندهم كاش.
شكرا.
انا ما بتفق مع كذب بين كذب الجنوبيين قال يكون فيها قروش على الواقع.
نعم شكرا جزيلا اخونا قشوق. اي راديو نعم. You can still get back to us right here and ask your good question. I radio.
Madrama James, good evening.
Good evening, David.
This is me, David Magog from Wow.
Welcome.
My brother, welcome your guest in the studio. His explanation 100%, but the doubt there is in implementation. I have two questions to him. Number one, the budget that have been passed, the previous budget, which is supposed to be used 2023-2024, who have used that budget and people were not paid for the whole year. And now you are still making another budget, while you did not even complete a supplementary budget. Where is your role here as a ministry or as the people concerned? This is number one. Number two, the proposal of the budget that you are talking about now. We know the process of the budget should be proposed in the Ministry of Finance to Executive to the Parliament. After that, it will be passed. Where is the Parliament currently? Or does it mean the Parliament will not be functional? You are the one making the budget. And the 4.2, we are not even working, and you are now increasing it to be 5.2. Where will you get the money? Or do you people want to deceive people all the time, only making figures without cash? Where are you going to get cash? Or do you have a policy of printing more money, more than the money we have now currently? Because we don't know exactly where is our pound. The pound is absent. In the same time, is being misused because of dollar. And we don't know exactly where are you going to get money. Lastly, is about the consumption. Many are only being used in Juba and they don't reach 10 states. Why do you propose budget? Is it only for politicians or for all the citizens of South Sudan?
شكرا.
Thank you.
راديو.
Hello.
نعم.
فرانكو زبد.
مرحب.
أنا متهيألي كذا هي أخونا بابوي.
نعم.
عايز أقول لك كده. طبعا مصر بابوي الميزانية لم يعلم ثلاث فصول. الفصل الأول هو الدول وشفتوه ولا شفتري. نحن من نعمل ميزانية ما ممكن نعمل ميزانية في جوز في داخل جوبا. أنا لازم لا يعمل ميزانية بتاعت البروبوز بتاعته المين باور بتاعته اللي هو الشابتر 1 شابتر 2 هو السيرفيسز وشابتر 3 هو الديفلوبمنت. هسه حاليا الناس الميزانية بيعملوها بالأرقام بزاد عن كده بزود ما في نقاش. الميزانية الأخيرة اللي كان 2024 ما في تغريب. المصروفات كلها في الدولة كم والإيرادات الدولة كم والمشاريع اللي كانوا لغاية بداية عشان يعملوه هل في مشروع نجح ولا في مشروع ما نجح؟ المفروض يعملوا شنو عشان يكون في نجاح للمشروع. ده واحد. ما بدنا نعمل ميزانيه على اساس انه ارقام افريقيا ووسط افريقيا لا ما ممكن لازم يكون في المشروع نعمل مشاريع حيه كهرباء ده مشروع مويه ده عندنا مشروع اما بالنسبه للشوارع ما في دول بيعمل شوارع الشوارع يعملها ودي اجريمنت الدول بعدها مع حكومه الدوله دي بتجيب من الشارع مش الدوله اللي بيعمل شارع فالمفروض ان نعمل البروبوزل عشان الناس تستفيد منه.
نعم شكرا. هاي راديو نعم.
مساء الخير.
مساء النور.
بسلم عليكم وبسلم للضيوف في الاستوديو.
شكرا جزيلا.
معك دين سانتو في واو.
مرحبا دين سانتو.
أنا سؤال بتاعي للضيف ده نسأل نقوله دولة جنوب السودان 200 بكون عنده مصنع بتاع القروش. ده سؤال واحد. سؤال 200 بكون عنده مصنع بتاع القروش. الناس كلام بتاع القروش بقى صعب. ما في عملة بتاعنا ما في خالص ما موجود ما متوفر. 200 بكون عندنا مصنع زي الدول الثانية عندهم مصانع بتاع القروش كان كلام بتاع القروش ده يكون متوفر في البلوغة. ده سؤال نمبر واحد. سؤال نمبر 2
shortage of cashes.
الدولار. الو
يا انا معك.
هل الدولار اصل ماشي في جنوب السودان ده عملة بتاعنا ولا عملة أجنبية؟ إذا كان عملة بتاعنا ما عملة أجنبية هل مصدق في برلمان زي ما قاعد بيصدق ميزانية رأس في البرلمان؟ شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا أكرم مخالمة. أي راديو.
Hi, Radio, how are you?
Tamam, community advisor from Bor.
Yes, let me welcome our guest in the studio and the presenter of today.
Thank you.
I have very simple question and it will be answered. The budget is 52 trillion.
5.2.
Yes, 5.2 trillion SSP. And they don't know how much are circulating the system as the currency of South Sudan. They don't know the fixed amount which are in the system.
You mean printed amount, right?
Yes. The amount which are released since South Sudan got independent up to today. They don't know the fixed amount which are in the system and they release to 5.2 trillion. Where do they get money? Now, there is no cash in the bank. And those cash in the bank is the problem people of South Sudan. Now we are suffering for not receiving salary for May. I myself, I failed to receive salaries for this month or for last month, which was left. Today, I don't know where do they think they will get money and they will utilize those 5.2 trillion Sudanese pounds. Number 2, do we have government or we don't have government?
All right.
Thank you so much.
All right, Boboy, we are left with about 4 minutes, and let's first start with some of these good questions here. Use of the previous budget, who use it? Because civil servants entirely, almost, they fail to get their incentive. Then they are talking about 5.2 trillion. Where are they going to get the cash with all the liquidity crisis in the country? Welcome.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, so I think I just want to respond to, first of all, Uganda just passed, they're now discussing their budget 2025-2026, but they passed a supplementary budget to finance some of the things that they envision to be financed in the current budget, so they can sort of go into new budget without having problems, right? So I would recommend, if there's money in this country, is to look at how much money is required, and then they come up with a supplementary budget to Parliament, and the Parliament will then pass that budget, and then they can use that to sort some of those issues out. Because, I mean, payment of salary is key. If they can find some money and then pay salaries, that would be very good. So that everybody feels happy that, okay, the budget is actually being utilized. But the problem is that there's no willingness from government to do that. Of course, there's no money that government can be able to spend. First of all, if you look at this 5.2 trillion budget, it's just an expenditure plan. but they're going to look for money to finance it. And one of the bad things that the government has been doing for many, many years since we got our independence is that they pass budgets, but they don't even fulfill the budget to 100% in terms of transferring the money and spending the money. We have evidence of people, in particular institutions, have over expenditure by 500%, 1,000%. That becomes an issue. So there must be a kind of confidence within the budget process and expenditure processes in this country that is needed. That's one of the recommendations. So the second thing also,
Magog even talked about, there is a proceeding. Now the parliament currently they are at recess, and there's also passing of budget. Who passed this?
It's supposed to be parliament. And the reason why parliament is not able to meet is because there's no money. I don't want to say the government is broke, but there's no money in parliament, because you have to have money in order to bring parliamentarians to come back. So until they're able to allocate funding to the parliament will come back. But of course, not only because of that, but of course, some of the issues also to do with the parties are not, some SPLM-IO is not like intact, and then because of that, it's actually hard for parliament to meet, because some of the members of parliament are not in the country. So you cannot have a parliament that is not forming a quorum to discuss parliamentary procedures issues. So that's one. The second thing also to do with shortage of cars. There's too much circulation of funding of SSP in town. But when the economic crime units of the national security came up and say, if you don't bring your money to bank, we will confiscate the money and things like that. So people got scared. And I've seen many people in South Sudan that are digging holes in their own houses to keep the money. You see, there's no confidence in putting money into the banking system in South Sudan. So we need to do there must be a confidence building measures because people are afraid of government when they make decisions, right? So I think that needs to be happening. We got some information that perhaps maybe the bank governor was fired because he's not able to mobilize a lot of liquidity money, right? So that needs to happen, that we need to have a lot of money in the circulation. But of course, one thing that I also want to talk about is that we're advocating for the money that is meant for the states and the counties to be transferred to those counties so that people get paid. And I like what one of my colleagues talked about in the POC, that perhaps maybe it's important, or the guy from WOW, that it's good to just send the money to the states, and the states do the payment. But even one of the problems is that even this money is transferred, some people also are not getting their money, because this money gets eaten up in between. I mean, you've seen what happened with Central Equatoria before, when the Minister of Minister of Information, of Education, sent the money to the Central Equatoria government and started to delete the allowances section so that they can eat that money, and then they don't want to pay the teachers. Until the teachers had to have the strike, then only then they get paid. And even not all 100% payment, right? Yeah. So there must be a kind of, we need to have a very human heart as government people to be able to really help the problem of this country in terms of that. But for us as civil society, we're pushing government to become more transparent, more accountable to the action they're making, because everything must be done in accordance with the national and public interest.
All right. Yeah. Boboya, thank you so much for sharing your thought with us. Dear listener, up to here, we have come to the end of this very conversation. And thank you as well for asking your good questions right here.
إحنا كلنا جنوبيين سودانيين، ما مهم منو جاي من وين. إحنا محتاجين نحترم بعض وندعم بعض، لأنه إحنا واحد. إحنا كلنا بشر كسودانيين جنوبيين، بنستحق عشان نعيش بالسلام، نستحمل بعض ونصالح خلافاتنا ونعيش بالسلام. ده رسالة تسامح والتعايش السلمي.